When you're wanting to grow some salad greens, it doesn't have to be just lettuce. There are so many other choices out there these days. In previous episodes, I've talked about some unusual subtropical greens, but today I'm going to talk to you about a few other really interesting green-leafed plants that you can use in your salads and cooking. One of my favourites, I would have to say, is a plant called sorrel, and it has a beautiful, in this pot here, obviously its juvenile growth is quite small, but eventually once the sorrel is established, the leaves can be quite large. It's got quite of a bitter taste, but if it's added sparingly throughout a salad, it's wonderful. Obviously there's famous dishes as well, like sorrel soup and things like that as well. So sorrel can be used in various applications. Another really big favourite of mine is chicory, and you can get a red stem chicory or just the green leaf chicory. Now it goes to around about sort of a rosette of foliage, no more than probably about sort of 30 centimetres high. But once it comes into flower, the flower spikes can actually get up to around about sort of 4 foot high. The flowers are the most beautiful cornflower blue in colour and are also edible. So not only can the foliage be added to salads, but the flowers can as well. Once again, it tends to have a little bit of a bitter taste, and I find in my backyard I actually have to keep it a little bit under lock and key. If my chooks are out, they come along and demolish it. So it can also be used quite successfully as a poultry fodder as well. Another really popular one to use, and most people would know this one by now, is rocket. This is your standard leafed rocket. It has a very peppery sort of flavour. You can get wild rocket, which has a much thinner leaf as well. The flowers also, little white flowers, are also edible in salads. It is only an annual, so you'll find that once it flowers and sets seed, you'll actually find it's one of those volunteer plants in the garden, so you'll have plants coming up over and over again each season. You can also obviously collect and save the seed yourself. Something else which is really easy to grow is the red mustard, and obviously that can be used in various dishes as well, but it's lovely in salads because it also has a very peppery sort of flavour. Little tiny yellow flowers, which are beautiful for attracting bees, also attractive in the garden, can be used in the salads as well. And another one that will volunteer by self-seeding in your garden. Not to pest proportions, but just enough so you've always got a few of them coming along. So it can get quite large. The leaves can get quite big. So I find using the foliage, especially when it's smaller and younger, it tends to be a lot softer and easier to eat. Once the leaves are big, they're a bit leathery. Other things that I've got here too is watercress, and watercress does like being grown in sort of moist conditions. It will grow in the soil as long as there's adequate moisture, but it can be also grown in low water features and ponds. I have mine sitting in a pond with some Vietnamese mint and some kangkong as well, so I've got a few edibles in mine. Once again, lovely peppery sort of flavour. If it's well watered, it's quite nice, not quite as strong. Does get white flowers, which are also edible, and as you can see, it's sort of setting down roots as the stems go along, so it's very easy to strike from cuttings. Another thing that's becoming very, very popular, and I've seen lots of articles and stories about it, is kale. And kale can be, especially the younger leaves, used in salad. A lot of people are using them as creating kale chips and cooking them in the oven. A lot of people are also using kale in green smoothies and, you know, vitamin and mineral rich drinks. So kale is really becoming very popular in the kitchen, a bit gourmet these days. This is just your curly leafed green. I actually like growing kale just because even though I don't eat lots and lots of it, it's extremely ornamental in the garden. For example, this one here is your Tuscan black kale, sometimes is most commonly seen grown as. It has lovely dark grey blue foliage. Will get to around about probably about sort of, you know, nearly a metre high in the garden. Really beautiful as a contrast plant, even just as an ornamental, you know, not forgetting the fact that it's highly edible. The other one in the kale family that's very popular at the moment and readily available is the red or purple Russian curly kale. So it's quite attractive. You can see by these seedlings, it's got lovely dark purple stems, and when it grows up, it's a lovely big rosette of this amazingly beautiful, attractive purple foliage. I like using this in the ornamental garden, sort of contrasting against silver-leafed plants like wormwood and so forth, and use it as actually a border edging plant, even though it's an edible. I think a lot of people tend to sort of steer away from using edibles in ornamental positions, which they shouldn't, because some of these things can be really quite attractive, just as attractive as petunias and marigolds and all those flowering annuals. So the main thing I think when you're thinking about growing your salad greens is that they will grow quickly. And if you harvest them often, that's going to encourage more new foliage to come through for you to harvest. Keep them well fertilised, so using fish emulsions or seaweed can help condition the soil. Will keep them growing and healthy as well, and that will encourage more growth, and that's what you want for that sweet young lead to use. You can grow them in the garden. You can easily grow them in any form of bowl, terracotta, plastic and so forth, in troughs, even in hanging baskets. And like I said, the watercress will even lend itself to some water garden and ponds. Keep in mind, if you are using terracotta, that it is porous, so it will dry out more quickly. You might want to use a sealant first, or even if you're growing in a trough, you might even consider growing them in pots placed within the trough, whatever the case may be. But just make sure that you keep the water up to them in containers. They will dry out more quickly. Pest attack, I suppose there's always going to be little things like grubs and grasshoppers, but I think the key is for observation, and if there is any pest attack, then deal with that as that comes along. There are a lot of natural remedies out there to deal with that, and especially when they're your edibles, you don't want to be spraying or using anything harmful chemical.